Sunni from theadventuresofsunny.com, and currently we're in a retrograde of Mercury, which prompted me to start digging into all of that stuff, and I realized that I am not an expert in that. There's things that I know and I've explored lately, but I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about, and this is Molly. And Molly knows some of these things, so I thought I would pull her in and just chat about what I don't know so that everybody can learn as I learn. Talk a little bit about astrology. I always confuse astronomy and astrology, and I think I've got it clear. I think astronomy is the study of the science of the stars, and astrology is more the study of the impact of the stars.
It's the
which gets more into the woo-woo stuff, right?
Yes. Astronomy is the physical cosmos. Astrology is the inner cosmos.
This is why you're the expert.
Yes. Exactly.
So, okay. So when I grew up in a really traditional, like Pentecostal Christian household, and I was just, parents did the best they could with the tools they had, right? And so I was always taught that astrology was kind of voodoo devil work. And it took me a while to get to the point where I could actually relate to it as a useful tool versus something that was wrong just because of that conditioning. And what's amazing, my parents are so awesome. My family's amazing. It's gotten to the point where my entire family is kind of like meh about it versus, right? Mm-hmm. Which I love that we can all grow and evolve together. Side note. So the perspective of astrology, so you said it great, how the difference between the two, but can you give like maybe a little bit deeper definition of astrology?
Well, metaphorically speaking, we live in a holographic universe. So, and I want to tell you what I mean by that.
Please
do. Basically in a certain type of hologram, and if you take that glass and break it and you shine that same laser through each shard, you get the whole picture in each shard. So I like that as a symbol for how we have, a grand cosmos and a grand universe that we're part of, but that same exact cosmos is reflected inside of us. So instead of thinking that the stars create and cause things, which is part of the argument of astrology, like, oh, that's impossible, they're too far away, gravitational pull, blah, blah, blah. I like to think of it as they mirror what's going on inside of us. So it's a good way to think, to set your compass according to what's going on with the stars. And we each have a specific blueprint according to when we were born. It's a really good tool to learn how to get to know myself and why I had certain propensities or certain leanings, and why my personality was a certain way. You can find out your pitfalls and also what's conflicting within you. And it's one of many tools. Numerology is another one.
Yeah, you did a numerology chart for me last time we hung out in person, and since then I have been like digging more and more into that. So that's like the next step.
I do use those tools to sort of kind of check my intuition, and what's really fun about them to me is I'll have intuitive hits, just like you do, and when you check the charts you go, oh, okay, and it says the same thing in different places, and to me that's proof enough, that's evidence enough that it's useful.
So everything you just said, now, after a couple of years of kind of steeping myself in what I call the woo-woo world, right? The world of like spirituality and all the things that as a kid I was taught were kind of not okay. But they feel really good now. So after a couple of years of being in this space of exploring, I'm like, yes, everything you just said makes sense. It mirrors, it's a great tool to explore. And I also just want to share with everybody what my entry point was. Because everything that Molly just said, if I had heard her say maybe 2, 3, 5 years ago, I would have been like, devil woman. Because it was, I didn't have space for it, right? You have to kind of give yourself permission to baby step something. And this is where I kind of come in with my whole choose your own adventure thing, right? Like if one truth doesn't work for you, find one that does. So the truth that worked for me to give me permission to kind of step into your world was just the notion that the Earth is one planet in the galaxy, and that there is this gravitational pull, and that there are these stars, and that we watch like the Hubble telescope videos, and there's like all of these impacts, right? Everything does impact each other, and we know scientifically that a star that is really, really far away something happens and it impacts the planets around it, even if they're light years away. And so when I started kind of processing that, which can be mind blowing because it's like this endless, right? Like I can easily disappear into that. But once I pulled myself back in and got over the massiveness of it all, it started for me with the idea of being a Leo. That's my sun sign. And I am very Leo. And
Yes.
I am very Leo. And so whenever I read any description of Leo, it's like so spot on that I was having a hard time denying it, but then I was having a hard time accepting it because of my religious background. And so after all of this exploration of like the massive universe and the impact, the thing that gave me access to allowing all of this into my consciousness was the notion that I incubated in my mama's belly during a specific 40-week, for me it was almost 50 weeks. I was stubborn. But I incubated in my mama's belly for this specific 9 months, 10 months that we talk about, right? Every other person who falls into the Leo category incubated in their mama's bellies at the same time during that 12-month cycle. So the same parts of the season, whether it was summer or fall or whatever the case may be, and there's an impact, right? Like we know barometric pressure goes up and down when depending on seasons, and like there's an actual impact to the earth. That's why we have seasons. So it kind of makes sense to me from a, like, I can reconcile it in my non-educated scientific brain that, yeah, I incubated at the same time as that Leo, and it kind of makes sense that that would have an impact on how I developed in utero and then how I came out. And now there's so much more, and what you say resonates for me, but I had to start somewhere. And so I just wanted to offer that up to our viewers of like, figure out what works for you. If something feels right, but it sounds wrong, like think about ways it can sound different to let it feel good so that you can explore those things that feel good. So I'll get off that soapbox. So there's a lot in the world of astrology, right? There's all of the planetary stuff. There's signs, like your star sign. And then I learned recently that there's a sun sign and a moon sign and a whole bunch of different signs. I have an app. I'll put a list of resources below the video, but I have an app called 5 Signs. I think it was like $1. And it's been really, really useful as I navigate the world to kind of compare people's stuff. So that's been kind of fun. Can you give us like the super high level primer on, if we're just starting to get into astrology, what should we go and learn about ourselves so that we can start to figure out which bits and pieces are really impactful for us?
Absolutely. First, a couple of things just came to mind as you were talking, if you don't mind me sharing.
Yeah, you can interrupt me. I'm totally interrupting.
Well, I came from a similar background in a Methodist home. So a lot of my early training in religion and things like that really made me question when I started to be interested in other ways of thinking about the universe and God and the divine. And I enjoyed coming to the conclusion that, well, the divine created everything, even ideas of astrology, even ideas of numerology, even numbers and the things we build as human beings. So to me, it was interesting to finally come to a point where I didn't separate the two. And that leads to a thought of, yes, these kind of things do happen in the more creative right side of the brain, where rational thinking is not the forte. It's more of an intuitive understanding, which is not necessarily going to be, something that A plus B equals C. It's going to kind of be a little bit nebulous, and that's where the art of understanding it comes in.
Yeah.
So it's a fun way to think about it, right?
Yeah, it's another truth. If it works for you here and lets you get better here, go for it.
Right, exactly. And a really funny thing about the cats and the Leo, a lot of people might say, well, not every Leo is the same. This person is shy and this person is confident, and think about how many different kind of cats there are in the world and how they're different.
That's right, because the Leo's the lion.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
The lion, but there might be a shy little, alley cat type person, or a big roaring Leo, and like your energy is very leader oriented, and that really, even your eyes, you have cat eyes, so it's very interesting to see. You look at Leos, I knew one fella, he reminded me of the lion from Wizard of Oz. Like he just had this sort of energy about him. So Yeah, break it down. Like everything can just be broken down in lots of different pieces that it's not going to make sense on the surface always, but it's fun to pick it apart and see, again, what works for you.
Excited too, because I've got the power incubator coming up. And that's essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of pick at the surface of a whole bunch of different ideas so that the women there can get an idea of what feels good to go and explore further. But it's just having the permission to do that. That's what I love about the work you do, because you kind of help give people permission.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's fair game, you know, and healing happens in all different kinds of ways. So let me get back to your original question about basic planets and what you want to know if you're getting into astrology. So the very first thing is to get your birth chart done. So most people know their star or sun sign, sorry. And that's your persona. That's the, hey baby, what's your sign kind of thing. And it's really the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, so I get that the sun sign is the one that we're all the most familiar with. It's the persona. I think it's also when you read the horoscopes, that's typically what it's geared towards, right?
Right.
And I heard you mention a rising sign. So based on my limited exposure to all of this, my understanding is that there's the sun sign and then the moon sign are like your two dominant. But then I hear people say what's your rising, what's your setting. And I've always kind of categorized that as like a secondary thing. But that was where your brain went to next. So could you help kind of distinguish? So we've got the sun sign, which is the persona. What does the moon sign rule?
The moon sign rules the relationships, the way you do relationships, and in your heart. You're kind of the persona of your heart. So it's the way you are in your closest relationships and your romantic relationships mostly.
Interesting. I did not know that because I am a Sagittarius in my moon sign, which now things are starting to make sense.
Before I get too far, I want to explain it. With your birth chart, you're going to need your birth time and your time zone and location of birth. And that's basically going to zero in right where you are according to the planets. And that birth time, and some people don't have it, so they'll have to use noon and they might not get a perfect orientation of the rising sign. But that's going to be sort of where the moon was when you were born. So the moon is constantly going around, once a day.
Right.
So that's going to change throughout the day. And that's going to sort of put another shade of color on your persona. So it's going to be kind of the front face, your sort of social mask, basically.
Because I'm a Leo rising. So I'm a Leo and a Leo rising. So I'm like a double Leo. I know.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you had another Leo, Mercury. So the way you communicate is also very Leo.
Yes.
So, and that's what Mercury is. It's the way, and I'm a Leo Mercury as well. So I have some more shyer aspects to my personality, but then when I'm comfortable, I'm very bantery and very Leo as well. So it's very interesting when you start to look at all those planets, you can kind of again, split your personality down and go, oh, okay, that makes sense why all those things are the way they are.
Talking about the sun sign, and that rules the persona, and then there's the moon sign, and that rules the heart, and then rising has to do with your time of birth.
Yep, and that's more like your superficial persona. So think of it as the quick, hi, how you doing? My name's so-and-so, and how you might appear to somebody who doesn't know you really well.
Right.
That's going to be the rising sign. So it's really kind of a quick, and a lot of people might say, oh, I like them at first. No, I'm not so sure. Usually it's because they picked up on the rising sign. And once they get to the sun, it's like, oh, we don't have as much in common as I thought. Mercury rules communications. In this day and age, technology, travel. It's the way we exchange information, any way of exchanging information. So Mercury is going to be the mode of humor. It's going to be the way someone explains themselves. So Leo is very direct, often funny, sarcastic, very confident. And you have all of those things.
And Mercury, goodness.
Right.
Like, if you don't like Leo, you're not gonna like me.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other signs that kind of go, like a Virgo is more particular and detailed and things like this. So it can really throw people off depending on the way people express themselves. So that might be very different than, say, their upfront persona. So it's really interesting to find out. And when Mercury goes into retrograde, wherever your Mercury is can tend to affect you a little more or less, depending on how communicative you are as a Mercury.
Okay, so then from an astrology perspective, you mentioned getting your birth chart done. I mentioned the app 5 Signs, which basically does a quick and dirty birth chart. And so the way I approach things is that I will dabble and spend $1 here, a couple bucks here, a barter for something there. And then when it gets to the point where I'm realizing that something is very impactful and I need to dive deeper, I will start investing in it. I will invest 25 bucks in a book to keep on my bookshelf that I don't have right now, but you know what I mean? Because I'm digital and nomadic. I will also potentially invest in an expert to help me understand this. Now, I know that you are not an astrologer. That is not your specific expertise. Is an astrologer the person that you would go to start understanding all of this? Am I correct in my terminology? Is that the name of the person you would look for?
Absolutely. Yep. And there's a lot of good ones out there where, and I'll suggest some links that we can share. I don't want to name them all right now as to jumble it up, but I will name one, www.alabe.com. It's ALABE.com. It's been around for a long, long time. You can get a great free birth chart there. And some people get so into it that they start planning, the day they're going to move into a house and put something, stake their claim on a house or get married or start school, or that, you can actually consult with people to the very nth degree and plan your life according to it.
Right.
I'm not that detailed, but
that doesn't feel right to me either. Although I will say that I've gotten to the point where there are some things that I know Mercury being in retrograde is very impactful to me. So I have that on my calendar and I purposely avoid certain activities around that time.
Sure.
And I know that the entire time that Leo is active, which is like basically most of July, is very prosperous time for me. Lots of good, juicy things happen. So, I do a little bit of that, but yeah, not a whole lot. I have a couple of astrologers in my sphere I have not worked with personally. So yeah, we'll put links for people if they want to start deep diving and investing into this and find out. So we talked about, I have a sun sign, I have a rising sign, I have a moon sign. We talked about the fact that I am a Leo in Mercury. Is there a sign associated with all of the planets in our galaxy? Like, does every planet have something that it rules? Are you aware of that?
No, actually, it's more when you see a chart laid out, it's more like there's a circular chart. So there's 12 houses that fall into different aspects of life. And your sign will fall into, the different signs will fall into those houses.
Right, the 12 houses are the signs.
Right, it's like a wheel, and so it's a dial, and they're always in the same order, but they will dial differently according to when you were born. And then the planets fall differently into those houses. So basically, you'll say
all 8 or 9 of them, depending on.
Right, and there's actually 10 because it counts the sun and the moon.
But I'm reading a book right now where the author is going through and he's basically giving like the mythology behind the different signs. And each time he talks about a sign's kind of inception and mythology, he's giving a really awesome description of that sign's kind of personality type. Which has been really, really helpful for me, not only as I navigate my own chart, but also as I meet other people and think about my partners and friends and what their signs are. Like the idea of Cancer being like the protector and Leo being very flamboyant. And so I'll put a link to that for you guys because the first few chapters are available on Google Reader, and it's been really, really helpful.
That sounds good. I'd like to read that too.
Yeah. How did you kind of start to get educated, or do you have any resources you could suggest on how to start to get educated on the different personalities of those different signs?
Sure, yeah. My favorite book that I use to this day, and an astrologer friend gave this to me probably 15 years ago, it's Astrology and Relationships by David Pond.
Nice.
And anytime you're having issues with, not issues, but you meet a new person in your life that's playing a big role, or your family or friends or coworkers, anything, however much you know about them, it'll go through each sign within the chart and help you understand the pitfalls of the sign, the challenges, the strengths, what would be helpful to work on in each person, and what you need to know about, somebody with Mercury and Leo. So it's really very cool, and you can see behaviors that you might not understand in someone, and then you read this and go, oh, okay. So it helps you it's a good relationship tool. I find it very, very helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the 101. I know, like I said, I tend to just kind of pick at stuff until I find something that starts to resonate, and then I will deep dive. And so, given my history with all of this, I just thought it'd be really helpful to give people who follow me access to kind of picking a little bit. And
Good.
I know you're a great resource for that. So
Good. It's a total pleasure. Absolutely.